First place is on the line in College Station this weekend. The LSU Tigers go into Kyle Field to take on Texas A&M. Helping us talk all things LSU. Good friend of the show, Blake Ruffino of AYS Sports and Ruffino and Joe Show joins us once again. Blake, been too long, my friend. Pleasure to have you back on and excited to talk LSU Tigers with you. What's up, man?
Do you smell what the Rock is cooking? No, that's not how it goes. The gumbo's in the air. The bourbon's in the air. Chris, I told you this last night. Now, I'm going to say this, but I don't like talking about our personal conversations. However, there is one thing that you and I talked about last night on the phone that I think is interesting going into this game. Anybody in the Bayou will tell you that when LSU has success, they have these certain feelings, like when Paul Skeens comes out and throws 102 and strikes out, 8 of the 9 batters that he faced, you're like, yeah, we're not losing. Or like when this guy behind me, Joe Burrow, he just dotting up Texas, he's dotting up Bama, and you're like, yeah, we're about to win a natty. Chris, in a win, what does it say about Brian Kelly and this LSU team? Or what does it say about Mike Elko in year 1 at A&M if they win? High stakes, man, with 2 massive fan bases. And listen, I'm going to say this before we get rolling because I don't want to – I've been known as the troll A&M dude on social media. I am glad A&M is having success because when that fan base gets rolling, the conference is better, right? Everything is better when a Texas school is really rolling. So this is for the number 1 spot in the SEC. Man, I am really fired up. Chris, before I came on, we're right here in the studio. We're watching the all-22 copy of the A&M defensive line, man. It's going to be one hell of a battle in College Station Saturday night.
Blake, I want to get in that matchup specifically in a second, but first, what just took place this previous weekend? Again, I know we discussed this, and you have on your show extensively as well, but LSU looked about as complete as they've looked all season, dismantling Arkansas 34-10. This, Blake was looked at as a game, maybe as a quote-unquote trap game, or the Hogs were kind of going all in on taking down LSU coming off the bye week. And, I mean, listen, I thought the Tigers would go in there and handle the business, but about as impressive, Blake, as they've looked all season. What did you see in that game? Feels like this LSU team, again, are they a little bit chaotic? Sure, who isn't in college football this year, though? But, Blake, it kind of feels like they're getting better week after week after week. They're really finding their identity, on the defensive side. Whit Weeks has emerged as a guy that probably has the most sauce in the SEC, but also is the leader of that defense, it feels like at this point. And, offensively just continuing to build more and more and more confidence. What'd you see in that game against Arkansas specifically that impressed you so much?
No turnovers. You made really good decisions. Chris, I like when I get serious and talking about football and me and my co-host Joe, or I'm not out here being a dumbass. I love talking X's and O's type of football. And here's what happened. Against Ole Miss, I'm going to back up the game that you were at, and then I got to move forward because I think it's a big deal to give context on this. There were multitudes of times on film where Garrett did not look or throw the intermediate passing stuff. And it was given to him. And he kept taking shot after shot after shot like it was a P. Diddy commercial. So when I look at, what he was doing against Ole Miss, all week last week, I'm like, dude, tone it down some. You got to take what they're giving you. If they're going to give you 8 yards, which, by the way, A&M plays a lot of off coverage. Tons, Chris, of off coverage. You have 2 wide receivers that are 6'2", 210 pounds plus, that you got to get the ball to. So I think that going into the game, when we talked about last Thursday, going into Arkansas, look, man, that's going to be there. Chris, you can call me old school. You can call me 3 yards in a cloud of dust. If you're going to give me 8, 9, 10, 11 yards, and I get to move the football down the field, methodically, I'm going to whip your butt. That's how this works. So, number one, the biggest thing without question is Garrett Nussmeier made right decisions. Chris, I'm going to say this, and people are going to backlash on me because they box score watch and they don't film watch. Garrett Nussmeier didn't have a touchdown. Doesn't matter to me. It was the best and cleanest game that he had played all year, without a doubt. He was on time. He was on point. He made right decisions. on third down, he throws a slant route to a tight end, slot receiver, and Trey'Dez Green. And I'm like, buddy, I mean, that's LeBron James running out there, my guy. Like, you got to get these dudes the football. And then when teams start coming up to take away the intermediate passing game, Chris, those safeties got to go down. But when they go down, they go out, right? Because they got to take the perimeter defensively away from you. So then you get to run the football. You know, it's like Brian Kelly's done this a little bit. Who would have ever thought that after 33 years, Brian Kelly would have figured something out? That in and of itself, Chris, to me, like I get a little bit emotional that in the sense, and emotional is probably a bad word. I love when you have a bad situation and then the next week you completely overtake that and then dominate that situation. Chris, that's what great coaches do. Now, Chris, defensively, LSU is 33rd in the country in run defense. And I hate what I'm about to say, but I think for context of how games have gone against LSU, it's key. LSU being 33rd in run defense is skewed, but in a positive way for LSU. What happens if you don't give up that 75-yard run to Lenore Sellers and Harold Perkins fills the hole? What happens if Whit Weeks doesn't break contain and Rocket Sanders isn't able to bounce outside, or Ulysses Bentley? Chris, the reason I bring that up is because when you look at the totality of the game, they're only giving up about 2 to 3 yards per rush. So the biggest concern for LSU this year, run defense, has now become the biggest strength. However, now it really gets tested because when I look at A&M, Chris, they're going to line up and want to punch you in your mouth. Let's go. Old school, Mike Yoko, tough, gritty head coach. They're going to line up and try to pop LSU in the mouth. And as people in the bayou would say, let's hit the Bontar Ray. Let's let the good times roll. All right, let's go. Because I think that Brian Kelly's demeanor and Blake Baker's demeanor has now come into that. Chris, it happened last week against Arkansas. And I don't think that Taylon Green played a bad game at all. Dude, I mean, he was under pressure. He was making really crisp throws. But then you got what, I guess the LSU fans are now going to call him the Honkey Badger in Whit Weeks. You have him going off. And, Chris, I think that they are finally, as The Rock would say, they are finally playing cohesive football. And when you can do that, you're going to win a lot of football games. I have not seen an LSU team on both sides of the ball be that cohesive in a game since 2022. It doesn't exist. So last week, man, you went on the road, hostile environment. They just come off of beating Tennessee. Chris, who is Tennessee, right? And then now you have LSU going in there and dominating, but you can't use transitive properties, and I understand that. But now you line up against A&M, who's going to want to play tough guy football. How tough is this team? We're about to find out.
Blake, you mentioned the cohesiveness on a side note. I know we got a lot of football left, but would you argue this LSU team right now, this team is better than last year's team, as in totality, it's a better football team?
Because
it's interesting because last year the offense was so good.
Yes.
The defense was so bad. So
I think as in a totality, Chris, yes. I mean, it was something that we talked about in the preseason. I think it's a very interesting question. Damn, that's a really good question. That's why you do this shit for a living. Yes, as a whole, they're probably better. The only reason I have pause is because, dude, the 3 top NFL rookies of the year are Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, and Brian Thomas Jr. And I'm like, I mean, Jaden Daniels might go off on you, my guy. Like I saw Jaden Daniels go off on this same defense a year ago, but it's a different situation under Blake Baker. So, yeah, I mean, I think in the totality of it, Chris, they are because they can get stops. And listen, Braden Swinson was on this team last year. The second dude in the SEC in sacks. By the way, SEC, do that man the right thing. The man should be leading the SEC in sacks. By the way, Chris, I'm not trying to go down SEC officiating. They screwed this man out of a sack against Taylor Green last week, but I'm not, it's either here nor there. But they have been able to, Chris, dominate in the front seven. And that has been what nobody wants to talk about. Look, Major Burns, who is the star safety role, the corner or the slot, Chris, LSU's tackling. I mean, the simple things. Like when you brought in Brian Kelly, what did you expect an LSU team to look like? Well, dude, LSU always got dudes, but what happens when those dudes start playing fundamentally sound? And Chris, if I would have told you in the beginning of the year that halfway through the year that LSU would jump defensively 75 spots in total defense, you would say Blake Baker Broyles Award winner. That's what you would say. Well, why aren't you saying it now? And so those are the things that I think, Chris, they get a turnover. Garrett makes a bad interception. Braden Swinson, 4th and inches. He busts through the line of scrimmage and knocks somebody's mouthpiece out. I mean, like, that's not an edge that they played with last year. Now they have a little bit more of a hedge, and then that leads to overall game consistency. Brian Kelly said something key Monday in his press conference. He said, you know what every team's in search for right now? Consistency. And I think that he's 1,000% right. I listened to Kirby Smart this morning. Kirby Smart on the SEC teleconference. Coach, what's everybody looking for this year in college football? He quotes Brian Kelly and says, well, I think the guy in front of me just said it the best. We're looking for consistency. It's not coach speak, Chris. I mean, that is what everybody's looking for. And so if LSU can continue to do that, they're going to be fine.
So, Blake, let's zero in on this game again in College Station. Huge opportunity for both sides. Certainly, though, for LSU, you feel like you've got the fast track to not just the SEC championship, but the college football playoff. If you can go in to Kyle Field and get this victory, a game in which, by the way, Blake, you are the underdog in. Texas A&M is a 2.5-point favorite. Before we dive into the X's and O's, Blake, because again, I love talking ball with you, and I love to hear your thoughts and insights on personnel, scheme, et cetera. But this, I'm going to use the word rivalry. You can push back if you want at any point, because I know that LSU folks, they maybe don't consider this a rivalry, but there's hatred here. There's hatred on both sides. These two fan bases go on social media for 5 minutes. These two fan bases loathe each other. There's been some crazy games over the years. We'll talk about it in a second. Obviously, LSU has struggled. I think they're 0-3 in their last 3 trips to Kyle Field. That kind of plays into it as well. But there's been some crazy games, crazy moments. But give me some insight on the hatred between these two. And again, one side says it's a rivalry. The other, I think, says it's not. I mean, whatever it is, Blake, there's bad blood in this football game, I feel like.
Yeah, A&M is the team in university that thinks that they're LSU, but they're not even remotely close. Right? I mean, Chris, they're not. You don't have the national championships. You don't have the SEC wins. You don't have the victories that LSU does, but they act like, Chris, they're the guy at the bar that acts like that they're the cool guy when everybody's like, we know that you drive a jacked up truck to overcompensate for something. I'm not saying that's how I feel. That's how the LSU fan base feels. Okay, I want to make that very clear before this gets clipped and A&M people are out for my head. I'm not saying that. That's how they feel. Chris, if I'm not mistaken, LSU won 10 straight games in this matchup when they came into the SEC. And it wasn't just football that they dominated them in. They dominated them in baseball. They dominated them for a long time in certain situations in basketball. So when we look at A&M, the LSU fan base calls them the Goobs, right? Like they're not necessarily looking at it. However, to your point of a rivalry, LSU fans won't admit this, but this is true. You consider Bama a rivalry, and you went 9 straight years without beating them because Saban was there. But, Chris, how about this? If I would have told you LSU and Bama football-wise is 3-2 in the last 5 matchups, and LSU plays them again to tie it, what would you have said? If I would have told you when Brian Kelly came into there, they would be damn near tied coming in, or they're tied and coming in matchups. Winning makes it a rivalry. And I think that, Chris, a lot of this gets based off of recruiting too, right? Like when A&M went through a coaching change with Mike Elko, LSU flipped like 3 dudes, right, from A&M, a big right tackle in Weston Davis, who was a 5-star. So rivalries kind of get built off of, in my opinion, recruiting. And we don't talk about that enough. It doesn't get mentioned enough. Like LSU and Brian Kelly walking into Texas and kicking down the door and saying, we're going to take what's ours. That's where it gets built off of. Don't get it twisted. This is a rivalry game. This is a game that LSU wants and that LSU needs. And I think that the SEC, Chris, for what it's worth, tried to make this a rivalry too. Let me explain. LSU was the void for A&M fans that Texas wasn't, because they put that game at they moved LSU's game with Arkansas up, okay, when my entire existence was LSU and Arkansas play for the boot and during Thanksgiving. Like, that was our rivalry game. That was rivalry week game. Well, they made that A&M. And I think that when everybody around the country started having big rivalry games like the Egg Bowl, and you got, an Ole Miss player peeing on a pylon, so then the coach gets fired, and then Lane Kiffin comes in. We didn't have that. You got George Pickens fighting a player against Georgia Tech. I mean, we didn't have that hatred. The SEC forced that rivalry to some extent, and I think it kind of based off of it. Last thing here. It 1,000% became a rivalry when LSU thought that they got screwed when Joe Burrow went up in there in the 7 overtimes, right? 1,000% felt like that they got screwed. And Chris, the truth is they probably did. But then that game, ironically, was the Joe Burrow coming out party. And I think that for certain situations, Chris, I think that big monumental things have happened in wins over A&M. Ed Orgeron getting hired. I mean, Tom Herman was supposed to be the head coach of LSU, and then that was being announced during the A&M game. And so I think there's just been so many wild things that have happened in this game and games against A&M that have sparked a hatred. LSU fans don't like A&M. They think they're cocky. They think that they're arrogant. They think that their mama's pit stains stink. They think their mama's gumbo tastes like doo-doo. I mean, all of those things are true. Ask any one of them. Chris, you're very successful in what you do. I dare you to send out a tweet. LSU fans, what do you think of A&M? A&M fans, what do you think of LSU? It will be the most interaction thing that you'll get all week, because LSU fans can't help themselves. It's like, they can't. I mean, they don't like them. But it comes down to, on the field, I do think that it's a rivalry because of the actions that have happened behind it.
So, Blake, when you look at the matchup and you look at this Texas A&M team specifically, lost that season opener to Notre Dame, have since gone on a heck of a winning streak, which really, I think, the signature win at this point, that game against Mizzou in which they dominated them. Coming off a game at Mississippi State in which it felt like maybe Connor Wigman wasn't quite up to the level he was against Missouri. So I still kind of sit here, Blake, and I'm wondering, okay, who is Texas A&M really? We're figuring out these teams as we go. I mean, October is the separation month. We're figuring out who contenders and pretenders are. But when you look at this A&M team, Blake, you mentioned it. They're gritty. They're tough. They reflect their head coach and Mike Elko. I think Elko was exactly what that program needed after Jimbo Fisher. Where do you see areas of opportunity for LSU where you think they can win some matchups? And are there areas where you're a little bit concerned when it comes to the matchups against the Aggies? They can present some problems for the Tigers.
I'll just go weaknesses first. Can LSU run the football? They couldn't do it against Ole Miss. Caden Durham, their really electric freshman running back, was about 75%. Brian Kelly pretty much now confirmed that in his press conference on Monday. Hey, man, he was out there. He was playing. But this kid, the truth is that he probably shouldn't have played, Chris. And but then he's getting healthier, and then he looked really healthy last week. So I think that my biggest concern is, can you get in those 2nd and 6 situations? Can you get in those, those 3rd and 2 situations? Can you run the ball on 3rd down? Because against a really good defensive line, Chris, which by the way, I mean, a lot of those guys are back. Besides, you add in a guy like Nick Scorton, but I mean, Will Campbell. I mean, that's the counteract to that. I do worry about LSU running the football, but I do think that LSU, to add to this, I think it's twofold. The biggest weakness for LSU would counteract that if you can't run, leans to their biggest strength in this game. Chris, I know that A&M is 50th in the country in passing yards allowed. Who have you been tested by? Brady Cook, Chris, think about this. Brady Cook was 11 of 13 for 136 yards and a touchdown against A&M when he didn't get pressured. Okay, so what happened with the 20 incompletions he had? A&M had 20 pressures. They had 14 quarterback hits, and they had 3 sacks. So, again, like when he wasn't pressured, Brady Cook actually delivered the football pretty consistently. Well, who's the number 1 team in the country not allowing, or SEC not allowing sacks? Well, it's LSU. So I think it's kind of crazy. Chris, if they run the football for 4.5, 5 yards, LSU they're gonna whip that ass. I'm just gonna tell you, they're gonna whip that ass. I don't know if that's gonna happen though, because I think that D line's pretty good. So I think staying with that intermediate passing game. And by the way, I don't think that A&M secondary is as good statistically as they've made them out to. Look, Van Buren lit them up. And Chris, I'm just going to tell you, you're going to play off coverage. Good luck. All right, go ahead. Go right on ahead and play off coverage and see what happens to you. However, I think that A&M, with the tenacity that they play with and how they play, how they tackle, how they do things defensively, could give LSU some massive issues here. It's going to be a close game because of the way that they're fundamentally sound defensively. Now, but Chris, you brought up an interesting point, and it's going to be interesting. The same exact thing can be said for A&M, right? Like in the sense of, well, hey, man, you've really run the football well. Well, you really ran the football well against A&M. I mean, against Missouri, excuse me. That's where everybody saw you, and you're like, damn, they're popping them in the mouth. But, Chris, it's a little deceiving, and let me tell you why. This is what they converted with. Now, I know this is getting published later, so I get to say this on the show. But anyway, this is what they converted against Mizzou. 3rd and 4, 3rd and 4, 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4, 3rd and 3. All were running plays. And we get deceived by Le'Veon Moss had a 6-yard run. He had a 5-yard run. He had a 7-yard run. He had a 4-yard run. So it looks like, and we perceive, man, A&M's whipping that rear end. Where they are. No, but what does A&M do? They get you into the methodical situations that if LSU cannot get into favorable 3rd and distance calls, Chris, this is going to be it's going to be a long night. So you better tackle well. But here's the thing to me. What quarterback doesn't turn the ball over is going to be key here, because Connor Wigman, Chris, I don't care what anybody says, he should have had 5 picks last week against Mississippi State. My man came all the way back down to earth. It's like what I told my wife when I met her. I was like, baby, did you fall from heaven? Because God dang. All right. He came back down to earth very much. If you watch A&M, please God, people watching this, go back and watch A&M. The receivers and Noah Thomas and Barber and those dudes were making ridiculous catches. Chris, those throws are not good. Those throws are really bad. But we look at the stat sheet and goes, oh, he's 18 of 22. He's playing. No, Noah Thomas goes up the ladder and gets a one-handed grab and comes down with it. That's a great play by your receiver. So what do they do with Connor Wigman? Chris, he looks a little flustered in the pocket when he gets pressured, man. I mean, I'm just going to call it what it is, but he's athletic enough to get out of it. So styles make fights, man. I mean, this is 2 teams that really have a lot of the same strengths and a lot of the same weaknesses. So what team is Chris, whatever team wins, because of they're so similar, you just got to probably chalk it up to they're the better team, right? Like I think that might be what you have to do. So we'll see, but Chris, whoever wins up front, it's the same as always. Whatever team wins up front is going to win this football game, and whatever quarterback limits bad decisions, that's where your bread's going to get buttered.
So, Blake, you bring me to my next point, key or keys to the game for LSU to win. It sounds like you just mentioned, trench play, quarterback play, especially on the road in the SEC. If LSU is going to go into a hostile environment, get the win, those things are going to be at a premium.
Yeah, you got number one, you got to get off the field on 3rd down. But more than getting off the field on 3rd down, Chris, you got to tackle them on 1st and 2nd down. You got to limit them from getting in those 3rd and methodical situations. You know why Mississippi State hung around? Because Connor Wigman was in 3rd and 8s a lot, 3rd and 7s a lot. And when they took away those quick outs and those hitches and those slants, Chris, they were in trouble. Right? That 100% is why they had issues. And I don't care what anybody says. Mississippi State's upsetting somebody this year. They played too good against too many good teams to not upset somebody. That's a good – their record isn't who they are, right? Like, I mean, they've gotten better every week. So, yeah, I mean, whatever quarterback doesn't limit turnovers. This is going to be an all-uniform game, by the way, right?
All black on all white, right?
Yeah,
LSU's
I want to be careful how I say that, you know, because
uniforms, people, uniforms.
I put it out there today. Our good buddy Sean Fox. I'm like, I tweeted. I'm like, I'm gonna be calm on how I say this, but uniforms, people. But yeah, what team can limit the least mistakes? Because I think, Chris, I think they're a pretty evenly matched team, man. Like, and when you have evenly matched teams, what wins? Who executes more by one or two plays, and then what coaching staff is better. Now, I'm going to tell you this. I think that Brian Kelly doesn't like getting, like Saban, he don't like getting beat by assistants, right? Like Elko was his DC, Clark Lee was his DC. He don't like that, man. So what staff can overall be better is going to win this one. And here's the question, Chris. Have we seen A&M? I mean, we can label Mizzou. That's fine. Have we seen A&M or Connor Wigman in these primetime situations when your season's on the line, right? Like, I mean, you can say Mizzou in that. Okay, I'm with you. But Notre Dame still exists, Chris. Like that. Like game one, I get it. On a new head coach, I understand it. Bowling Green still exists. Mississippi State still exists. And you can say whatever you want about LSU, and that's fine. I know they have not come close to playing perfect. College game day at South Carolina. You were at South Carolina. The big game atmosphere there. Ole Miss is arguably one of the best teams in the SEC. There should be making a playoff. Well, okay. I've seen Garrett in those primetime situations. Chris, I've seen Garrett Nussmeier come in the SEC championship game in a second half and throw for 300 yards on the national champion in a half. I haven't seen that from Wigman. So if Wigman does something special, everybody's going to be like, oh, yeah, we knew Connor Wigman. No, it would be really the first time in a big-time situation that he really performed. I mean, Chris, again, 18 of 22 against Mizzou is good. It's great. But that team is very flawed. So now how do you respond to that? So, showdown, baby. I think it comes down to the quarterbacks. I mean, it's as simple as that. I think you're even on a lot of areas, Chris. I mean, look, one's 31, one's 33, one's 16th, one's 17th, and all these statistical categories. You know, like, I mean, what are we supposed to do with that? But it's going to come down to quarterback play.
And Blake, the good news for you guys and for LSU on a side note is that I won't be at the game. So I feel like this conversation would be a lot more tense if I was.
I cannot confirm or deny that I paid Chris Phillips not to be in College Station.
I feel like this conversation would have been a lot more tense if I were going to be there.
Oh, I wouldn't have showed up. I wouldn't have been there. I wouldn't have shown up. I mean, you know, I take you to Pyran's, I butter you up, you know, I get some
and
food.
This is how you repay me?
This is how you got to repay me, man. You can't be in College Station this weekend, but you are going to Las Vegas. All right. Hey, all right now. Y'all going to go ahead and play with Vandy. All right. Dude,
well, listen, I tell you this, Blake. If Vanderbilt does the unthinkable, we go 4 for 4 on field rushes and 5 straight home underdogs win, they might ship me off to Hogwarts and have me studied. So, I'm gonna become the new professor of the dark arts teacher if that happens.
I'm going to tell you this. I hadn't told you this yet. There is a prominent person at LSU who has seen the run that you've been on. And I would not be shocked if one of our sponsors paid for you to be here for Bama, paid for you to be here at Vandy, and paid for you to be here against Oklahoma. So you better get used to the Bayou, baby.
I'll be offering palm readings in pregame for anybody.
Hey, man, go down to the Voodoo Woman. The Voodoo Woman would tell you right now special things are happening in Baton Rouge. Yeah. But, Chris, here's another thing, too, and we didn't mention this in the entire 30 minutes here. Chris, is this not one of the biggest games? I mean, every game for Brian Kelly at this point is the biggest.
I was actually going to ask you that because, I mean, I think, you know, the Ole Miss game, you mentioned it was a program definer, and maybe that's a little aggressive here. You can tell me if I'm wrong, but I mean, you know this, Blake. Each game you win, they keep getting bigger. I mean, that's the beauty of it. That's the position you want to be in.
But let me ask you, like, and you're right. Fans told me that I was being too aggressive by saying that. Well, no, I'm not. And let me tell you, Chris, what is the storyline going to be on Sunday morning if LSU wins? The team atop the SEC. Brian Kelly can come to the SEC and win. That's what look, Chris, you and I have been here in this game for too long. We know what the thumbnails on YouTube are going to say if LSU wins. We know it, right? And because, look, that is the narrative, and it's going to be pushed. LSU fans are going to be bookmarking every tweet that they've seen, and they're going to be quote tweeting it and subtweeting it like, you said that this man couldn't come down here. Chris, is it not a program-defining win when you're in year 3? Brian Kelly said wait until year 3. And now if you're atop the SEC, Chris, who do you fear at that point? I mean, you're going through the meat and potatoes of your schedule. So then you have a bye week. Brian Kelly is 13-0 at night in Tiger Stadium. Ruh-roh, here comes Bama. Kalen DeBoer, I know you've experienced the light, my guy, but you ain't okay. Tiger Stadium's going to be very quiet on Saturday when Bama comes to town. So I'm just going to say, but that's my point, though, Chris. I know, and you know, and your grandmammy and everybody's grandmammies knows what that thumbnail is going to read on Sunday morning. I can hear Paul Feinbaum now. Well, you know, I have Brian Kelly on every Monday. I think he's the pinnacle of the Get out of here with that. I know it seems aggressive, but Chris, I know this place like the back of my hand. I'm telling you, that's the narrative that's going to be pushed. And narratives make stories. Emotions make stories. And this in college sports in general, Chris, what do? It's a story. I mean, this is much of a story as anything. Like Days of Our Lives, that we're talking about grandmammies, your grandmammy's stories that you watch. This is what's going to happen. Same thing happens with Mike Elko. Same exact thing happens. So, all right. LSU goes in a bye week with Bama coming into town and you lead the SEC. Ooh, you better be back down here, boy. That's all I'm going to say now. You better be back down here. I don't care where you need to go. I don't care about all that. So I'm just saying.
Blake, final thing before I get you out of here on a lighter note. Texas A&M doing a blackout for the game. And again, I'm talking what they're wearing, right? Mm-hmm. It's a advertised Texas A&M's pushing a blackout. That mean anything to you at all? LSU going in?
LSU going in there, frosty whites. You know, like, I mean, yeah, I mean, Chris, when I think that teams do this, you know, like in the sense of, you know, like it was going to be a big crowd environment anyway. Mm-hmm. I mean, like, I get it, but like, what is going on like black uniforms or blackout do? I mean, you have like the whiteout at Penn State, I think is highly intimidating. You know, like I think that there are things. Kyle Field's intimidating because it's loud, right? Like, I mean, did you see Bryce Coon's video, by the way, of Brian Kelly forcing in sound music? Yeah. I mean, like, you look, man, I told you this. I don't know if it was on this show or this week or maybe another time, but we had a discussion. Chris, there's only been 3 SEC stadiums that I've gone to in my lifetime that have rocked my, like, I'm like, oh my God. Obviously LSU, Gainesville when it's right. Like, dude, when it's right, I'm telling you, the way that stadium's orchestrated, it just keeps all that sound in there. And you're like, dude, this is insane. And then it's Kyle Field, man. I mean, like, Kyle Field is, dude, because there's so many people and you got the Yale chants, hoo, hoo, you got all that stuff going on. It gets culty in there. I mean, it gets weird. Chris, there is a reason why Bama went in there and lost. LSU went in there and lost. I mean, why is it? Chris, 2 years ago when that happened, they were a 5-7 football team. Mm-hmm. I mean, what are we discussing? I mean, look, you can underestimate that if you want to, but it is such a tough place to play. I don't underestimate it. Anybody that underestimates playing in that place is an idiot because it is loud and culty.
Good way to put it. Blake Ruffino, AYS Sports. Blake, let folks know in case they've been living under a rock where they can check out all your work, not just AYS, but Ruffino and Joe Show and everything else you got going on as well.
Yeah, Ruffino and Joe Show live on Sundays, Mondays, and Wednesdays. We're going to give out our picks this week. Chris, I got to throw this out there. Your boy's connecting on 78% of his picks.
These are straight up, right?
Yeah, these are straight up. I don't do spread. I mean,
fair enough.
I mean, look, this is what I say. You ready?
I want to throw this out there. Yours truly, after this, going into week 9, straight up SEC picks. And again, y'all do it differently because y'all are picking national games. So
yeah,
we've had a lot of like non-conference kind of kick-ins, but yours truly 66-15 straight up picks, leading
fantastic.
our SEC.
Yeah, fantastic.
Not bad.
Yeah,
humble brag.
Dude, think about this. We got to break down Michigan State this week. I have no idea who to pick. I'm just like, oh my God. But Ruffino Joe Show, go over there, man. It's killing it. You know, I don't know why people tune in to two Italians yelling at one another, but it's fun. A lot of people go over there and listen. And then just AYS Sports, LSU. We talk some SEC when the fans actually allow me to and be normal. So, yeah, that's where you can find me.
Blake, you're the man. Appreciate you taking the time. Always a pleasure, and look forward to doing it again soon.
Always great to be here, man.